We're happy to have you with us this morning as we continue in a conversation that we've actually been having for 2 months now, believe it or not, where we've been talking about this thing called formation. And if you've been here, you've heard us talk about this thing called formation over and over again. In other church contexts, you might hear it referred to as discipleship or program of confirmation. But they're all different versions of this thing that falls under this Christian umbrella term of formation, which is just a reference to this process of becoming who we were meant to be and experiencing the life that we were meant to experience. And we believe and we recognize that the life that we long for, the life that we want to experience, the life that we're looking for, when we're just looking to find happiness, joy, peace, fulfillment, satisfaction, that those things that we're looking for are the things that God is inviting us into. And when we join with God in that process, it allows us to experience that life that all along we've been looking for. And not only to become the people that we were meant to become, not only to experience formation, to experience life differently, to show up in our lives differently, but we become people, transformed people who transform other people. We become the kinds of people that produce transformation in other people. And this is kind of God's program, is that those who are restored become agents of restoration in others. And so the church, individually, we are transformed, and then as a church, we transform one another communally, and then that transformation gets passed out into the world, and that's kind of what God is up to. So we've been talking about this process of formation, and just kind of to get us oriented to where we are, we'll quickly cover this because we've talked about this a number of times now. If this is all new to you or you're here for the first time or the first time in a long time, you can double-click on these things by going back to some of our previous messages to get the background and the context for some of these things. But just to catch us up to speed, what we've talked about is that the work that God is doing in the universe is this work of integration, that we find this design principle throughout the universe that we've been calling integration, which consists of these attributes of individuated collaboration. So individuated parts collaborating collectively together with a collective give and take. And we find this design principle throughout the universe. We find it in the movement and the rotational orbit of the solar system, individuated parts working collaboratively together. We see it in a flock of starlings, individuated parts moving collaboratively together. We see it in a piece of music and an orchestra, individuated parts working collaboratively together. And when we see it between human beings, we call this love. That there is this principle of love that governs the universe. And when we live in alignment with that design principle of love, of individuated parts working collaboratively together with a collaborative give and take, when we enter into that design principle of the universe, what we experience is wholeness and restoration. And what it produces is at a universal level is this thing that we see referred to throughout the Old Testament called shalom, which shalom was this theological concept that the Jews had of wholeness, of things becoming complete. And in the New Testament, it's referred to as teleos, completeness, wholeness, and also referred to as salvation, as the culmination of all things coming together into this integrated wholeness. And we find the New Testament witness recognizing that this wholeness is found in the person of Jesus, that in Jesus all things cohere, all things hold together, all things become complete through this principle of integration, which is really, truly, at the end of the day, love. But when we look around the world, we look around our lives and the lives that we actually experience, we don't find this, and what we've recognized that the core problem that undermines this, especially between human beings, is the result of fear. This fear that if we actually lived in alignment with the principle of love, it's going to cost us something, that there's risk involved when you're living in alignment with the principle of love, because it requires a giving of oneself. It requires a receiving of another self. And there's fear involved because there's something on the line. And behind that fear is this wonder of, well, at the end of the day, who or what is behind everything? Question mark. Who or what is behind all of it? Is this universe a safe universe? Is there a something in this universe that's going to guarantee that at the end of the day, everything is okay? Is there such a being? And if so, is that being good? That was the question in the garden. And when it was questioned, fear seeped in. And the result of fear is disintegration. It is the breaking down, the decomposition, disintegration between human beings and Creator, disintegration between human beings, disintegration between human beings and creation, and disintegration within ourselves. It's chaos, and we often try to resolve that chaos through rigidity, but rigidity never works, and the resistance to rigidity tends to be chaos. This disintegration looks like breaking apart, fragmentation between us and God, us and each other, us and creation, within ourselves. And that's what the Bible refers to as death and destruction. And this is this fear-driven approach to life, the fear-driven strategies that develop to guide us through life, the fear-driven strategies that we develop in response to our circumstances lead to the disintegration. And this is what the Bible refers to as sin. At the core of sin are fear-driven strategies seeking to have legitimate needs met, but ultimately lead to disintegration, death, and destruction. That's why sin leads to death. And the solution to this, the solution to the fear that leads to disintegration and death and destruction, the solution to that is the revelation of who is behind all things. What God has been up to in the world is the restoration, you had it, the restoration of trust. That trust is the antidote to fear, to demonstrate that that which is behind everything is actually trustworthy, which is what God did in the person of Jesus. That when we see that behind everything is a God who is as good as he's revealed himself to be in the person of Jesus, we can trust. We can trust that at the end of the day, everything is going to be okay. That trust is the antidote to fear. As Paul said, if God is as good as he's revealed himself to be in the person of Jesus, if God is that good, what can be against me? What can stand against me? What do I have to worry about? What is there to be afraid of, right? If God is as good as he's revealed himself to be in the person of Jesus. Whereas John writes that perfect love drives out fear because fear has to do with punishment. And the one who fears has not yet been made perfect, whole, teleos, in love. That Jesus came to demonstrate the goodness and the love of God, because when we see the goodness of the Creator, it restores trust. And when we trust leads to integration and wholeness, restoration and shalom, the experience of salvation. And so when we read from the New Testament witness that we are saved by grace through trust, it's not presenting a transactional conditions where if we believe the right things and behave the right way, it's like giving God the right ticket that allow us to get into the amusement park. That is transactional. But what this is describing is a natural condition, that when we see the goodness of God, what naturally results is that we trust him. And from that trust, what naturally happens is a human being with the image of God implanted within them becomes transformed. It's just what happens. It is like getting the pH balance right in the soil. That when the pH balance is right, the seed just grows. It's just what it does. As we talk about this process of formation, this process of becoming, it's a process of restoring trust. Or what we often find translated, it's the same word translated in the New Testament as faith or belief. It is the restoration of our confidence in God, which is what allows us to enter into this process of formation, of integration. So, we've been talking about what is the process. How, if at the center of transformation, at the center of this formational journey is this restoration of trust or our confidence in God, how do we do that? What does that look like? And this is what we've talked about. Is that at the center, we're looking at restoring trust over fear as our central condition, as the condition of our heart. And that being the center, there are three things that we talked about that we do to maintain that condition of trust, that we maintain an awareness, that if we want to change our hearts, that changing our hearts starts with the condition of our hearts. If we want to change our hearts, we have to know the condition of our hearts. So maintaining the ability to be aware of our condition. We talked about developing practices of acceptance, an openness. This is a posture of hospitality. It is the internalization of God's grace to ourselves, the ability to accept ourselves as we are, our ability to accept others as they are, to pay forward the grace of God, to accept others as God has accepted us, and to be able to accept our circumstances as they show up because we recognize that there is a God who is as good as he's revealed himself to be in the person of Jesus, who's working good through all things for the good of those who love him. And this mindset of curiosity and growth, recognizing that all of life is this perfectly orchestrated process by a loving, good God that is meant for our growth and development into fullness. So it's an approach to life with this openness to what is it God inviting me into now? How is God growing me now? That this operates at the center, and outside of this, that the development or the formation process consists of formation of worldview, that as we form the way that we see the world, as we see the world the way that Jesus saw the world, as we see as Jesus saw, we live as Jesus lived. And it reinforces trust. In this formation in the realm of habits, that Jesus said, whoever puts into practice these words of mine is like the wise man. That formation of habits, living the way that Jesus invites us to live, reinforces our trust because we see that as we follow him, it actually makes our lives better. And in this realm of relationships, because we are formed in the context of relationships, our relationship with God, our relationships with each other, and the way that we relate to ourselves. That these are the realms of formation, and as we form within these realms, they reinforce each other, and they restore at the center the experience of trust. So, we spent a long time talking about the core. God bless you guys for staying along with us in this journey. This month, we're going to be zooming in to talk about this idea of worldview and why worldview is so important and contributes so significantly to restoring trust that leads to formation. So, let me illustrate with a story of something that my wife Monica did to me, but she didn't mean to do it to me. It was just something that happened. It wasn't intentional at all. No. So we keep goats and an assortment of odd farm animals. And one evening, one night, I'd gone out to put the animals to bed for the night, to close up the barn and get everything shut down for the night. So it was dark. We have no lights between our house and the barn. We have no lights in our barn. So we take a flashlight to close up the animals for the night. There was no moon. It was pitch black out. So I'd gone out. I'd closed up the animals. It's about, 75 yards from the barn to the house. I'm walking back from the barn across to the house. And again, just black, just pitch black. I'm walking back. I hear this scurrying around in the leaves, like up in the woods to my right. And I pause just to, because everything sounds bigger when it's scurrying around in dry leaves. Like a squirrel can sound like a monster. And so I was like, it's probably nothing. But it wasn't just scurrying. It was urgently coming towards me. And in the pitch darkness, I couldn't see what it was. I just knew that there was something rushing out of the woods towards me. And the kind of animals that we eat are not the kinds of animals that run towards us in the dark. They run away from us. The kinds of animals that run towards us in the dark are the kinds of animals that eat us. Right. And so, in my mind, I'm recognizing this is a dire situation. There's something running out of the woods towards me. And so, I needed to get the flashlight on to see what this was and how I need to respond to this situation. So I fumble, and it's just not user-friendly, and I can't get it on. And, my heart rate is elevating because as I'm fumbling with the flashlight, it's getting closer and closer and closer, right? My heart rate's elevating, like my body is shunting like all of my blood to my extremities because it's about to be run for your life or fight for your life. It's one or the other, and I was trying to make the decision. Am I ready to run to the house, or am I going to have to fight for my life? Which is it going to be, right? I can't get the light on. My breathing's getting shallow, like amping up because this is like do or die. Finally, I get the flashlight on, and it's Chloe, our golden retriever. And the way that Monica plays into this is that while I was in the barn, unbeknownst to me, she had let the dogs out to use the bathroom before they came in for the night, and I didn't know that they were out running around, so I was coming back from the barn, and there they were running towards me, and I had no idea, and I was terrified for my life. And once I saw that it was Chloe, the golden retriever, that was coming towards me, what happened? Took a deep breath, breathing went back to normal, heart rate went back to normal. Instead of fighting this animal, I was petting this animal, right? The whole thing changed, right? The whole scene changed. How I was experiencing it completely changed. My response completely changed. But what was the only thing that really changed? Because the reality was the same. All along, it was a golden retriever coming towards me for pets. That was the reality all along. When the light came on, listen, the only thing that changed was my understanding of reality. That I went from a misperception of what reality was to understanding and having an accurate view of reality. And having an accurate view of reality changed everything. This is why worldview matters. Because the world we see drives the way that we show up in and experience our lives. And this is why Paul wrote. Paul, who was a persecutor of followers of Jesus until he became a follower of Jesus because of his encounter with the resurrected Jesus, and he wrote a letter to a group of followers of Jesus in Rome, and in chapter 11 of that letter, Romans, he's extolling the goodness and the grace of God revealed in the person of Jesus, and at the end of it he says, in light of this, therefore, give your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to him. Because God is so good, you can lean all the way into him. You can trust because he really is that good. And our question is, how can we trust that much? And Paul says, well, this is how. Don't be conformed to the pattern of this world. Don't live the way that everybody else is living. Don't conform to the fear-driven approach and strategies of life, but instead be transformed, be made new by the renewing of your mind. That what produces transformation is the renewing of our minds. When we see reality as it is, the natural result is that we transform. When we see the world the way that Jesus saw the world, the most natural thing in the world to do is live as Jesus lived. I mean, think about it. If you could see the world, if you could see reality through the eyes of Jesus, if you could see with crystal clarity the goodness of God, a God who's so pleased with you, who's so kind, who's so generous, who wants nothing but your very best, if you could see eternity, right? If you could see that on the other side of death is eternity, if you could see the value of every human being that you come in contact with and you saw the image of God in them, if you knew your value in the eyes of your heavenly Father, if you could see those things in your walking around day-to-day life, it would change the way that you lived. It would change your values. It would change your priorities. And you would find yourself living as Jesus lived. And so this process of transformation, it stems from learning to see the world the way that Jesus is inviting us to see the world. And so this is why we read the Bible. This is why we read Scripture. This is why we pray. You know, we read Scripture to help us to see reality the way that Jesus is inviting us to see reality. We pray to cement that in our minds. We come to church like this to learn about what reality is like, who God is, who we are, how life is actually supposed to work. This is why we learn. This is why we do these things. We're not learning these things because when we believe the right things and God's finally happy with us. We learn these things because it changes the lens through which we see the world, and the natural result is that we live the way that Jesus is inviting us to live. Now, a lot of us, many of us, some of us, I don't know, a lot of us, we've learned these things, right? We've learned the things that we're supposed to believe, the things that we're supposed to believe about God, the things that we're supposed to believe about ourselves, the things that we're supposed to believe about heaven. We've learned these things, and yet, more often than maybe we'd like, more often than maybe we'd care to admit, we experience life down here in the realm of fear. Still we find ourselves living from a place of fear. Still we find ourselves living reactively. Still we find ourselves closed up in relationships instead of opening up, becoming integrated in our relationships. Still we find ourselves in that place. Why is that? Why is that disconnect there, even though we believe the right things? Here's why. There's a way, let me do it this way that reality is. And like we say, there's a way that we see that reality, our beliefs. We believe the right things, we still experience this because there's still another disconnect between those beliefs and how we actually see the world in our moment-to-moment, day-to-day, walking around lives, right? We believe that God is good and full of grace. Oh, but we see his disappointment when we make that same mistake over and over and over again, and we see a God who's disappointed in us. We believe in the infinite value of all people. Oh, but we see villains when other people's interests are at odds with our own. We believe in eternity. Oh, but we see our physical clock ticking down and we live with a sense of urgency. We believe in our own infinite value in the eyes of our Heavenly Father. Oh, but we see our lives and our value in comparison to everybody else. There's a disconnect between what we believe is true about reality and how we actually see reality. And around here, we give names to these things because we just love to name things. And we call this our beliefs. We call that our creedal worldview. We'll explain that in a second. We call the way that we see the world our functional worldview. Aren't you glad we have a bigger whiteboard? Life's so good now. Life is so good. Our creedal worldview, this is what we say that we believe. Like if somebody asked us, what do you believe about God? What do you believe about eternity? These are the answers that we can give. If we sat down and took a test about our beliefs, these are the answers that we would give, right? This is what we say that we believe. But behind that, there's this other way. It's the way that we actually see the world. We call it our functional worldview because it's the way that we see the world that actually drives the way that we show up and experience the world. And what creates this functional worldview are all the implicit and explicit lessons and beliefs that we have without knowing it internalized over our entire lives. The things that we've been explicitly taught, the things that you were raised to believe and that were drilled into you over and over, as well as the things that you've been implicitly taught by how you saw your parents interacting with each other, by how you experienced your parents interacting with you, the things that you've learned from the ways that you've been treated and what that taught you about you and what that taught you about others. The messages that we absorb from the culture that we're in, that we don't even realize we're absorbing these messages. The feedback loops that are created between our actions and the results that come from those actions create the world that we see. We touched an electric fence and it shocked us, so we learned, don't touch those anymore. It became a way that we saw the world. We made ourselves vulnerable in a relationship, and that vulnerability was used against us, and we learned, don't do that anymore. We scroll through TikTok incessantly, and our brain rewards us with dopamine. It says, do that more. This is good, right? And it creates a feedback loop. That's how addictions form, dopaminergic feedback loops that tell us these are good things, do more of these things, create habits that undermine our best and the best of others. They create the functional worldview that we look through to see the world, the messages that we implicitly receive and don't realize we're receiving them and internalizing them, that we receive from parents, that we receive from peers, that we receive from supervisors, that we receive from advertising and marketing, and all of these things feed into, without our conscious awareness, feed into the functional way that we actually see the world in our moment-to-moment walking around lives. And if we're not careful, the way that we end up seeing the world is through this lens that says, God's probably not there, and if he is, he really doesn't care that much. And it seems like life is aligned against you. Your circumstances are against you. Life is opposed to you. Everyone is out to get you, is going to use your vulnerability against you. And oh, by the way, you're not as happy as everybody else, just so you know. You're not that attractive. You're not that bright. And you're a fraud pretending to be a grown-up, and eventually you're going to be found out, right? This is the lens through which we see the world in our day-to-day walking around lives, which doesn't match what we actually know is true. Some interesting differences between these. This one we know. This one you can write down. This one, we largely don't know what's in here. It requires a process of discovery. But this is the one that actually drives our moment-to-moment reactions, our moment-to-moment values, our moment-to-moment priorities. When we talk about worldview formation, what this process consists of is, number one, learning how to integrate these two things. How do we form our beliefs so they match what reality is actually like? How do we learn to see the world as it actually is? How do we learn to see a golden retriever instead of a bear barreling down through the woods at us, right? How do we learn to match our beliefs to the way that reality actually exists? And unless you have perfect knowledge, right? If any of us have perfect knowledge, all knowledge and perfect knowledge, that process isn't important for you. But if you don't have all knowledge and perfect knowledge, we have to learn how to align what we believe with the way that the world actually is. The other piece is learning how do we take that, how do we internalize those beliefs, that those beliefs become the way that we actually see the world. That we see the world through the eyes of Jesus, that in our walking around moment to moment, day to day lives, we're living with the values and the priorities of our Creator. And so next week, what we're going to be talking about is how do we reconcile what we believe with what reality actually is. And the following week, we're going to be talking about how do we reconcile those beliefs with how we see reality in our walking around day-to-day lives. To do both of those, we have to do and start with what we're going to talk about with a little bit of time that we have left this morning. We have to start with what we actually believe right now. That if we want to bring our beliefs into alignment with reality, we have to be able to know what is it that we actually believe. And if we want to internalize those beliefs into the way that we see the world, again, we have to know what is it that we actually believe. Now, here's where, in my experience, I've seen a lot of Christians, new Christians, mature Christians, all Christians, tend to have this same kind of common struggle, right? If you are a professional Christian and come to church 52 weeks out of the year, congratulations to you, 52 weeks out of the year, and if you're a really professional Christian, you don't just come to church 52 weeks out of the year, but you probably listen to, we'll just say, at least one Christian podcast a week, right, on your drive to work. That's 104 pieces of content in a year. That's a lot of content in a year. And for most Christians across the spectrum, there's no instruction about how do you take in and make sense of all this content, of all these sound bites, of all these applications. At the end of a year, what do you have from that year? Because what's the expiration date on most messages? They don't last much longer than a week, do they? It's too much information. It's too much data. How do we take that data in? How do we make sure that that data agrees with and is in alignment with what we already believe? Right? How do we add that to our knowledge database? It's too much. It's like having 104 pieces of information and no way to organize them, no way to access them, no way to say, like, on week 36, we talked about this, and that applies to this situation this way. We don't have that access. It's like having a library that keeps adding books and books and books and books, but never develops a reference system for how to find the books that you're looking for when you need to access those books, right? It's like going to Wonder Book and Video, right? Do we have any fans in here, right? They just don't do that, which is fine. You can do that, but it makes it hard to find the information that you're looking for when you're looking for it. Makes it hard to cross-reference your information, right? And so what we advocate and encourage is essentially a reference system for what we believe, so we can organize the beliefs that we have And as we learn new information, we know where to find the old information in that reference system to see, does this refute what I already believe? Does this complement what I already believe? Does this support what I already believe? And so we encourage, we have a reference system. I'm going to draw a reference system. But I would encourage you guys, if you don't have a way of organizing the way that you see the world, this is a helpful way to do it. And at the top of this, we're going to draw a lot of boxes. And I hope at the end of this, you guys love boxes as much as I do. And the top box is, and listen, this reference system is applicable to any way of seeing the world. So anybody at any spiritual point in their lives can take their beliefs and put them into this system of reference, this worldview framework, and you can grow from there. And that's what we're looking for. So this top box is what we call ultimate reality. Okay? So if you were to do this homework assignment at home, which I'd encourage everyone to, that you'd draw a box for ultimate reality, and you'd put in that box, what do you believe is behind everything? What is it that is behind everything, that is responsible for all things? What is it that's behind everything? What do you believe about that thing that is behind all things? You just start putting what you believe in there. And then below that is another box that we call sources of truth. How do we know what is true? How do we draw conclusions about reality? What is it that we look to? What is it that we look through to understand reality? What do you use to draw conclusions about reality? That's what goes in this box. And then the next three are pretty straightforward. They are past, present, and future. What is behind us? These boxes are getting smaller only because I'm running out of room. Not because they're less important, not because your box should be smaller. But anyway, where are we coming from? What is it that has led to the conditions that we find in the world today? What is it that has led to the condition that we find ourselves in today? Why is the world as it is? What is behind us? What's going on right now? What's significant about the present moment? What's happening? What's supposed to be happening in this present moment? In light of what's past, but also in light of what's future. Where are we headed? What are we looking towards? What do we expect is going to happen as we look into the future? Fills these boxes. This informs, one, what do we understand? I can say words. Watch me. It informs what we understand to be true about people. So, based on reality, based on sources of truth, based on past, present, and future, what conclusions can I draw about what is true about people? And then from that, what is true about me? What are my beliefs about me? How does all of this inform my values, my priorities, how I see myself, and how I live my life? And as you fill these out, it starts to create a picture of how it is that you want to see the world, or at least the way that you think the world actually is. And this gives us a system that as we move forward in this path of reconciling those beliefs with reality, it gives us places to refer back to. And as we go through the process of reconciling what we believe with how we actually see the world, it gives us a system to refer back to. This is the process of how we believe. And most spiritual communities will give you and serve up to you, here's what to believe. And what to believe is important. But often stop there. Here's what to believe. Now believe that. What we think is important, and the reason that we're spending time talking about this is because there are actual mechanics for how we take those beliefs and turn them into the way that we see the world that results in the kind of transformation that Jesus is inviting us and longs for us to experience. So, if that's something that's interesting to you, that's what we care about here at Key City Church. We are all about freeing people into their God-given potential, removing the constraints that prevent people from living into the life that God created them for. And one of those constraints is a misperception of what reality actually is. And so we're inviting people into this process. So if you are among those people, we're excited about that. We have homework for you. We haven't had homework so far because so far this whole message series since January has been about the why behind all of these things. The why behind this. And you guys have been so patient through it. God bless you. We've developed in you patience. Been patient through this whole thing. But now we're through with the why. Now we're getting into the how. And this is the how. And with the how comes homework. So what I would encourage for you guys is spend time with this week. I'd encourage blocking off a half an hour of each day through this week and just list out these things. And just start at a high level. Just at a high level. Write the first words or thoughts that come to mind about what you believe, about what is behind everything, behind sources of truth, between past, present, and future. Take one pass on the first day. Just write at a high level. Take another pass the next day. Go to the next level. It's not meant to be an academic exercise to see whether or not you get the answers right. It's a contemplative exercise for you to understand what you believe about reality right now and to be open to that, to become aware of that. Because unless you understand where you are now, you can't get to where God might be inviting you to go. And you might recognize that some of these things are written with question marks next to them because you are not sure. It might be an area where your mind is changing or things are forming or you just have questions. That's okay. Annotate all of those things. Because when we take these things that sometimes are just so squishy and ethereal and we actually put them down in writing, it brings those things into a level of concreteness. Then we can deal with, we can evolve, we can understand, we can evaluate. It's really helpful. It's really helpful. I feel like there was something else I wanted to say about that practice. No, I think that's it. I think that's it. If you work on that this week. Yep, I still can't remember it. We're going to use that. We're going to use that as our starting point next week as we look at how do we reconcile that with how reality actually is. And the following week, reconciling that with how we actually see the world. So detail. Let's zoom back out. This is all about learning to see as Jesus saw, because when we do, we live as Jesus lived. When we see the world the way that Jesus saw the world, it restores our trust. It restores to us a clear vision of who God is. It restores trust. And as trust is restored, the soil becomes the right kind of soil. And the most natural thing that can happen is what happens is that we grow and we transform and we become restored. And restored people restore people. And you guys, you are the kinds of people that restore people because you are the light of the world. Within you is the divine image created in Christ Jesus to be like him. What God is inviting you into, it's what we want to partner to free you into. Will you guys pray with me? Father, we are so grateful for you, the love that you have for us, and the patience that you have with us. Help us to take the steps towards you, to learn to see the world the way that you see the world, to see your goodness as it is, to see eternity as it is, to see ourselves in your eyes, to see the value of others. Help us to sense your grace, the working of your Spirit, as we partner in this formation journey together. We ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.